Hello good people of YouTube and welcome to my hobby channel. In this video I will be kit bashing parts from Frostgrave Cultists, Wargames Atlantic Peasant Levy and FireForge Northmen Folk Rabble to make Warhammer Empire Flagellants. But before I do, let's cut to a quick unboxing of these old world religious fanatics. The Empire of Man Flagellants, or Flagellants, depending on what your preference is. $10, $20, $30 bases. Well, this is a bit of a jumble. Right, so one. See what we've got. Before I go any further, a destruction leaflet. And some very cool transfers, but I'm not quite sure what those would be used for. Anyway, good to have. Right, they're different. Okay, so you get 6 of these frames inside the Warhammer Old World Empire of Man Flagellants box. And even though it says on the back of the box that you've got enough pieces to make 1 unit of 30 flagellants with 1 Prophet of Doom and 1 Standard Bearer, or 2 units of 15 with 1 Prophet of Doom and 1 Standard Bearer, the fact that I've got 6 of these frames inside the box means I can create 6 Standard Bearers and 6 Prophets of Doom. I'm not suggesting that you go ahead and do that, but if I'm looking to kit bash some extra flagellant figures out of the Frostgrave Cultists or the Peasant Levy from Wargames Atlantic or the FireForge Northmen Folk Rabble, then being able to make more than 2 Standard Bearers might be an advantage. So if we take a closer look at this part of the frame, you can see the banner there that's used to create the Standard Bearer. You've got 1 body on this sprue, several interesting bits and pieces, keys, a noose and an egg timer, and various spiky hand weapons and flails. Depending on how they snap the sprues to get them in the box, you'll have 2 that are probably joined together. And on these 2 sprues, you've got 4 bodies. You've got the flaming torches that you can use to make Prophet of Doom. A whole selection of flagellant heads, many of them wearing torturous headgear. This head here has had its lips stitched up. This one here is blindfolded. In sprue, we've got the head and arms in stocks, which is used to make the Standard Bearer, although there's no reason why you can't have those dotted through the unit. There's this chap here with a scarred face and a beardy head there with a rope gag. There's a head there in an iron cage. This head with the burning brazier on top is the Prophet of Doom. We've got some scrolls and skulls there that look really cool. There's another scroll there. We've got various bells and other spiky weapons and some lengths of chain, together with a few more tortured heads. And that basically makes up everything on the flagellant or flagellant sprues. And I think these might mix quite nicely with the Frostgrave Cultists. And that's the sprue that I'm going to look at next. So in the box you get 20 miniatures. So that is 4 sprues like this. There are 5 bodies on each sprue, a wide selection of heads, some various arms, some of which are clearly decomposed. So if we have a look at these bodies, they're the usual kind of chunky proportions that we expect From Frostgrave, we've got a wide selection of heads, most of them hooded. Some different accoutrements, bones, charms, decomposing arms, lots of extra little bits and pieces, some gloved hands there, and then some slightly chaos looking weapons, swords, sickles, spear, clubs, an axe. And then we do have a few hands there as well. There's one clutching a chain, one holding a dagger, and I know the intention there is that you can chop a hand off an arm if you want to, and then add one of these extra weapons. So not a massive sprue, but quite a lot going on, and I think a lot of those bits and pieces will probably mix quite nicely with the flagellant sprue from Games Workshop. And if we take another quick look at the Northmen Folk Rabble sprue from FireForge, which I've featured in many of my previous videos. What's interesting here is, although we've got a selection of farm weapons and peasant bodies whose clothes are reasonably well intact, there are a few bits that offer some interesting possibilities for kitbashing flagellants. We've got the flaming torches, we've got some knives and sickles and scythes, we've got quite a few screaming peasant heads, and some of the weapons there into the kind of weapons that you also find in the cultist box. When it comes to the Peasant Levy from Wargames Atlantic, again with the two different sprues that you get in the box, the peasant bodies are a lot cleaner, the clothes aren't too dishevelled or ragged. But if you're thinking of toning down the flagellants and trying to add a few more villagers, a sprue like this might be more useful if you want to make your flagellants look less fanatical and perhaps more like an angry mob of religious followers or devotees such as priests and monks. Okay, so I'm not going to keep building vanilla versions of these figures every time I do a video. Here is Northmen Folk Rabble from FireForge, one I built quite a while ago for previous videos. I've tried to echo that with this build of a Peasant Levy from the Wargames Atlantic box. Again, I did scale comparisons in my previous video, but you can see there how the two different boxes work really well together. They give a nice subtle bit of variation, but they're close enough to look like they could be part of the same unit. And I'll be using some of these Folk Rabble and Peasant Levy to make an angry mob of religious disciples. The other thing I wanted to look at was some of the Frostgrave Cultists that I've already built. One or two of these have been slightly kitbashed. I was looking to make a unit of cult fanatics for my Bill Hook's Fantasia project, and that's basically what this is. They're blue tacked down whilst I just worked out how I wanted to go about basing them. I haven't decided how I want to paint them. So these are some cultists, more or less built straight out of the box. The cross on the top of this pole here actually comes from the Templar Knights or the Teutonic Knights that you get from FireForge in their Dust Vault range. And I think the chap with the cloak here has some arms from the medieval sergeants. What I'll do now is take a look at a vanilla flagellant and then some kitbashing. Okay, so I've cleaned up some bits here, and the first thing I'm going to start with is a vanilla build of a flagellant with a two-handed weapon. And I'll be looking at a couple of different two-handed weapons in this video on some of the Peasant Levy and Folk Rabble as well, because I've had questions from some of you as to how I go about assembling plastic miniatures with two-handed weapons, because they can be a bit fiddly. Now here, what you tend to get with the Games Workshop plastic is a tiny little peg and a little recess there that allows you to key the two parts together. Now if you're doing a dry fit, you can feel when those are in the right place. The problem I find with this is because they're so slight, the minute you put some glue on there, that little peg, tiny little bump there, starts to melt and becomes rounded very quickly. So if you're not confident with how the position of these is supposed to be, you can very quickly end up with something that doesn't go together as intended. So right now that feels like a pretty good fit there. So I'm going to try and glue the arm to the hand. This is one way. The other way you can do it is to glue the arms to the body and try and get the wrist to align afterwards, but I'm going to leave that to dry a little now, otherwise it'll just fall apart when I glue it to the shoulders. Okay, so that is reasonably well attached now, and I can start to line up the shoulders there, and there is a gap, which is not cool. So I've got glue on both shoulders, and I'm just going to bring in and squeeze ever so gently because I don't want to dislodge the wrist. And I'm just going to lower the angle of the arms there. That's it. So I've got room to put the head on. So that's one way of gluing on a two-handed weapon. And then I'll try and drop the head in there now. And it's not really sitting where I want it to sit. And try again. I think that's the way it wants to sit. It's not the way I want it to go, but there we are. Don't like that at all. Try again, because this isn't boring. Right, there we are. No, don't like that at all. Right, get rid of that head. Don't like it. So there's a different head that gives me a slightly better position, and that is the trouble with some of the parts that you get in GW plastics, especially these days. They will only fit a certain way, and there's not much scope for alteration. Some glue on the feet and try and get that in the middle of a base. So there is a vanilla Old World Empire Flagellants built straight from the box. Okay, so we've got a potential kitbash here using a cultist body and flagellant arms and head. However, there is a problem with this. Most of the arms don't fit particularly well because they come across the front of the body. So if you're using flagellant weapon arms with Frostgrave Cultist bodies, you might get one arm on like that, but then you're going to struggle to find a second arm because that too wants to cross the front of the body. So whilst that's a pretty cool pose, and if you had a different arm there, that would be a really nice pose for a miniature, it's not much good for a kitbash in an existing unit. I have found one arm here that doesn't throw the weapon across the front of the body, and another arm here that doesn't. But that's about it. I think in the whole box there's probably only 2 or 3 arms that actually work with the cultist body. So I'm going to give this a go and then salvage the head that I didn't have much luck with last time, just to see what we get. And I think the way the shoulders are on these cultists, it's causing a bit of a problem with kitbashing. So you could always use a cultist arm and just do a hand swap with a flagellant weapon. So I might try the same parts on a different body, but let's just see if we can get the head in there. It really is quite awkward with those weapon arms on that particular configuration. They're very hemmed in by weapons, very difficult to paint the face on that kitbash, so that's one of the challenges that you face. Okay, so I've removed those parts before they dried and I've tried a different body. This is slightly better. It does leave you open to paint the face, but again, it just feels a little bit cramped for my liking. I don't know how that looks there. And here's another build using a different body and the same head parts. That's quite a dynamic pose. I do actually quite like that. I think that might work well in a chaos army. But anyway, that's a cultist body again with a flagellant head and arms. And although I like the pose there, I'm not sure if it fits with that kind of solemn march of the other flagellants in the unit. But nevertheless, I think it was worth showing you this. I think if you want to make a unit of flagellants out of cultists and not actually use the GW models, there's lots of potential there. And I will look at that in a minute. But that's just gives you an idea. The cultist poses are definitely more dynamic and you're going to get a more action-packed unit. It might even be that the Frostgrave Cultists sprinkled in amongst the front rank of a unit of flagellants would add an extra bit of dynamism to that unit. So there's potential there, but it is a challenging kitbash. And then of course we can look at flipping that kitbash on its head and use a flagellant body with cultist arms and head. Now this is a tight enough squeeze for a dry fit here. Not 100% perfect, but of course this is a two-handed weapon where both arms are actually molded onto the weapon, so all you have to do is glue it in place. And as I said, this is a bit of a tight squeeze, this, so it works as a dry fit there. So we've got a flagellant there with some cultist weapon arms. And I just wanted to take a look at how that might appear with a cultist head there. That's quite a nice one, although it does seem to be rotting, slightly zombified, that one. I suppose you could paint that up to be well and truly flailed. Then we've got the kind of hooded cultist head as well, and that's actually quite a nice figure, that one. Okay, so here we have a folk rabble with a cultist head. And again, this is a two-handed weapon where you've got these little steps in the wrists. And I've cut off the adjacent arms, which I'm assuming are the correct arms because they were the closest. You can glue these arms onto the body and then try and juggle everything when you fit the hands on. But I'm going to try and glue the arms in place first. Just get that arm on there. If If you want, you could try and glue the other arm onto there and hope for the best, but I'm just going to do a dry fit against that shoulder there so that I can see where this lower hand is positioned against the body. And now I'm going to glue the arm on here to try and meet that, which was down there like that. So now if I can position that slightly higher. And I know that's more or less going to fit and not be too difficult to get into place. So I'm going to put some glue on there. Then very gently, it's difficult to do this and hold it in front of the camera so that you can see what I'm doing. Let's just hook the wrist under there, bring the shoulder up. That's actually it. Although it looks a little dodgy on top there, underneath that's in the right place. I think that gap there is actually intentional, so it looks like a cuff. That little step there. Put some glue there. And I picked a cultist head here, which just has an open face. So that's one possibility. And this might work in a unit that was a little bit more historical looking. Angry peasant, you know, religious follower, churchgoer, that kind of thing. Following on from that, I've used a Peasant Levy here from Wargames Atlantic with a flagellant's head that I've had to trim the neck off, and 2 flagellant arms, just to give me something a little different. Now, I'm not sure whether this would work in a unit, but it's potentially a kitbash that could be used to create a character or a Mordheim model. And then I've also done these 2 models here, both with Wargames Atlantic Peasant Levy bodies, but I've used arms from the Northmen Folk Rabble. And the one on the left has a Frostgrave Cultist head, and the one on the right has a head from the Dead Man's Hand Gunfighter's sprue. That would be 2 of those in a box of the Gunfighters from Dead Man's Hand. But I do actually think that a head like that might be something that you could green stuff if you're comfortable using a bit of putty. I do quite like the look of those 2 kitbash models, and I do think they would make quite a good angry rabble in a historical war game. So having said that, I just want to do a little lineup and a scale comparison with a few other minis. Okay, so here I've got some Perry Agincourt historical miniatures, and next to that the 2 kitbashed Peasant Levy with weapon arms from Folk Rabble. And as I said before, on the left there's a cultist hooded head, and on the right there's a hooded head from the Dead Man's Hand Gunfighters box. And I do think they make really good historical kitbashes there. Now here we've got some FireForge Dustvault Sergeant at Arms or crossbowmen, again just as a scale reference. So I'll probably use something like that sprinkled in amongst my troops for my historical and historical fantasy mashup, the Bill Hooks and the Bill Hooks Fantasia stuff that I'm working on, as I think that that goes really well, and I do like that. And here are the same 2 miniatures alongside some Landsknecht from Warlord Games and a Ghost Archipelago crewman from Frostgrave. And then very quickly we have an Oathmark human infantry figure on the left. If I just swing him round slightly, I think you can see from that angle that again it's a pretty good scale, and they'd probably work together quite well, particularly if you're building fantasy armies out of proxy miniatures. Okay, so now I've popped them onto a couple of slot bases so that I can show them against some GW figures. So we've got Flagellant there on the extreme right. That's a vanilla build that I did in this video. And another vanilla build on the extreme left, which is Empire Free Company Militia. I'll just swing him round that way because he's a bit of an odd stance, that one. But again, you can see scale-wise, they fit really well with the GW models. Now, I'm going to have a look at some of the flagellant kitbashes. Okay, so here we're looking at some alternatives using a Frostgrave Cultist body on the left-hand side with flagellant arms and head, and then a flagellant body on the right-hand side with the cultist arms and head. And I think these kitbashes present some interesting challenges. Certainly if you want a dynamic, angry and ferocious looking unit of flagellants, then I think the cultist bodies provide that. You've got lots of movement there, although as I said earlier in this video, it's a challenge finding flagellant arms that actually fit those bodies. Where things do start to get interesting, I think, is when you start combining the flagellant parts with the Peasant Levy or the Folk Rabble. The Peasant Levy are from Wargames Atlantic, the Folk Rabble from FireForge. And it started to spark some ideas in my mind where you could potentially have a unit of flagellants that starts off with the first couple of ranks pure GW models, and then there's a transition as you bring in some Peasant Levy and Folk Rabble, but you kitbash those with flagellant parts. So any spare heads and arms that you have left over, because that kind of tones the flavour down slightly, and then the rear ranks of the unit could be built using kitbashed Peasant Levy, Folk Rabble with cultists and anything else that you have lying around, almost giving the idea that you've got this fanatical unit of flagellants. The front ranks are very sort of hardcore, and then as you get further back, the unit is made up of people who have joined the flagellants as they kind of march to war. I think there's quite an interesting potential there to create a unit that has this slow transition through the ranks towards just village rabble at the back, and that might be something I look at doing. So there we are. There's just a few little ideas to be kicking off with. And this is the lineup of the models that I've managed to kind of kitbash together for this video. Some of them I think work really well, particularly these ones on the end, where you're creating a mob of angry peasants. I think when it comes to adding flagellant bits to other models, it works better with the Wargames Atlantic Peasant Levy and the FireForge Folk Rabble. It's a bit more challenging when you start looking at the Frostgrave Cultist bodies, arms and heads, and kitbashing those. Probably because Frostgrave is more of a skirmish game, and the poses that you get perhaps don't lend themselves to ranking up. But if you're looking at creating some characters, or you're wanting to use the Frostgrave Cultists as a proxy for the flagellants, then I don't think there's going to be a problem there. The problem occurs when you start mixing the GW pieces with bodies that don't fit that well. Anyway, I hope you found this video useful. If you have, please smash that like button. Please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you want to leave a comment, let me know what you've been doing. It's always great to hear what's going on out there. But as always, please remember to keep those comments kind and respectful. Whatever it is you're doing, have fun kitbashing. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.